Welcome to the Do Good on Purpose podcast, where you can listen to leaders discuss solutions to the most pressing challenges of our time, and where you can also support them by donating to the show's Giving Circle. This is a way to come together and take collective action, join forces, and together make a difference. Sometimes the most important work in the world begins with something we should never have accepted in the first place. A trash bag. Can you imagine that? Hand it to a child on one of the hardest days of their lives. My guest today is Rob Scheer, founder and CEO of Comfort Cases. Rob's commitment to this work is so deeply personal. He himself entered foster care as a child, carried his belongings in a trash bag, and aged out of the system at 18 with nowhere to go. Decades later, when he and his husband adopted their 5 children, each one arrived at his door carrying that same bag, and he decided that was the last time. What stands out the most about Rob is the way he transformed his own pain into purpose. He's a founder who took one of the most undignified symbols of the foster care system and built a national movement to eliminate it entirely. Comfort Cases has now delivered more than 250,000 backpacks filled with the basic essentials and comfort items to foster children across all 50 states, Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, and the United Kingdom. On today's episode of the Do Good on Purpose podcast, we explore what it really means to give a child dignity from day one, and why something as simple as a backpack can be the first message a child receives that says, "You are worthy of love and care." Rob Scheer joins us now. Rob Scheer, it is such an honor to have you on the Do Good on Purpose podcast. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Dorothy, I have to say thank you. You know, the fact is knowing that you started this podcast because you were trying to bring like-minded people together, but also trying to make sure that people continue to do good in the world. You're what I call a good human. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's what I think about you as well. I mean, your story is really so incredible. You have so much lived experience that you bring into the work that you do to support foster children around the US and in the UK. And I just think it's such an incredible thing what you've done to start this nonprofit, Comfort Cases, to work with foster children across the United States and in the UK. And what you're doing is a story I think people really need to hear, and the lived experience that you bring to the work that you do is something I want people to understand because it's so important in today's world when we think about all the heartbreak, all the hardship that's happening when we turn on the news. And I want to shift that, and I want to talk about the solution, the inspiration behind it that you bring to the work that you do.
Wow. Well, first of all, I have to tell you, I wasn't always open to talk about my past. See, as a kid who came into the foster care system in the 70s and then exited in the 80s, I saw firsthand how kids in foster care are treated. We're second then, we're less than. Being handed a trash bag and try to make sure that we feel more than. And as I was going through this journey and I, ended up homeless and, experiencing that as a young person and realizing that the only person that was going to help me, Dorothy, was myself. And that was something that it was very hard. And by the way, I was in my late 30s, early 40s before I even told people that I was in foster care. My husband knew about it. Of course, family members, those that were, in my journey. And by the way, very few people were in my journey from a little boy to where I'm in today, because again, I saw how kids were treated. But when our children arrived, and by the way, these 5 amazing humans behind me on the wall, they're our kids. And as each one of our kids arrived from foster care, Dorothy, carrying a trash bag, feeling less than, I knew that as one human, I had an opportunity to truly make the wrongs that were wrong for me as a young person. And with lived experience, I knew it. And so that's what we did.
That's incredible. So before we really get into the details of the lived experience that you really bring to the work that you do, and thank you for being so open to sharing it, because it's not easy to talk about our past, especially if it's been a tough past. But I want to start with giving our audience an understanding of what foster children actually go through. There's a statistic on your website that there are more than 390,000 children in the foster care system in the United States. And can you just put into context for our listeners what that actually means? What's the reality of what that experience looks like.
Well, Dorothy, those numbers, one child every 2 minutes, 700 a day. They enter a system that was created to take care of the young people whose families of origin couldn't take care of them. And so, the concept of foster care is amazing. But the problem is that there's no accountability, there's no oversight for this. So, an example is a child will enter foster care because of a choice someone else made. Okay. They enter foster care. 64% of the kids who enter the foster care system in the United States enter because of one word, and that word is neglect. Neglect is no more defined as poverty. And I'll give you an example. Mom cannot afford to pay the electricity. And so the lights have been turned off. And so she's got three young kids who are living in, a home with no electricity. She's working though. She's getting up in the morning. She's trying to figure it out. It's overwhelming. And what do? We call CPS. We tell them that the lights aren't on and we see little kids. And what does CPS do? They come in and take the kids and then ask questions. Number two, mom, single, living in New York City. And this is a true story that was on the front page of the New York Times. Young mom, single mom, gave birth, 5-year-old little girl. She was an active participant in PTA, never missed a conference. But guess what? She worked two jobs, morning and night. Her little 5-year-old daughter, the neighbor across the street would watch her. And she actually called the neighbor Nana. And the mom was sitting on the couch, Dorothy, and she was reading a book to her daughter. And she fell asleep. I've done that before with my kids. And the little 5-year-old little girl went over to the door. She opened up the door. She walked out of the apartment. She walked down the stairs. And as she was crossing the street to go to her Nana, a police officer pulled up. What are you doing, little girl? I'm going to my Nana. Where's your mom? I'm in my room. The police officer takes the young girl, puts her in the back seat of the car, and takes her to the police station. Child is removed from the mother. It took the mother almost a year, Dorothy, to get that girl back. Why I'm telling you this is because I want people to understand that, again, a child entered the system because of choice someone else made. This young girl should have been in foster care. And I'm saying 64% of our kids in the system, we can do better. They don't need to come in because when you enter foster care, you've already failed. You already failed. We need to figure out how do we prevent that.
Yeah, wow, that's really important context.
Well, I come from, I'm the youngest of 10. My mother had been married 6 times. I know about single mom raising and, you know, I don't blame these moms, but what I have to say is we as a society, we have to get back to the reason our communities were built in the first place. And it wasn't for us to constantly call the police and CPS and all that crap. We need to do what we should do. And let me tell you what we should do. That woman or that man who saw those lights off of their neighbor for a week at a time, why didn't they walk over and knock on the door and say, "Excuse me, is there something I can help you with? I see things are, the kids are out of, you need to talk to some." That's all it takes. That's all it takes. Mom worked two jobs. Why can't the neighbor say, "Hey, by the way, you got those 2-hour slots that you need? Let me watch the kids. Won't cost you anything." That's what neighborly love is all about. And we have lost that.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more with you on that. And I think community and that sense of community, I think we really need to go back to those values. And there would be so many less incidents like this if we all looked out for each other in that
Right.
way. Right.
And that's so true. But you know what, Dorothy? The truth is that we're not going to probably see that. Okay.
Right. And
So, yeah. So
it's a
what we
sad
need
truth, and that's what
is
you deal with, and that's what you see. And so when children actually go into the foster care system, what is that actually like? What does it mean to go into the system, and what are they
so
actually dealing with?
a child is taken from their home and it doesn't matter how bad the abuse is. It doesn't matter how bad the neglect is. These kids love their parents. I loved mine. They miss their parents, but instead they're taken out of what we call an unsafe situation and they go to a house of strangers. They are picked up. 90% of all kids in foster care enter in the back of a police cruiser. We put them in holding centers. We call them rainbow rooms and all that other crap, and they're no more than jail cells. They have broken toys, broken crayons, ripped up coloring books. And then the kids wait and they wait and they wait. And by the way, most of your listeners don't even realize this, but there are kids in our foster care system who literally wait days to find a placement. So guess where they're sleeping? In an office. In an office.
So heartbreaking.
There is not a state in this country that does not have children in foster care at one time sleeping in a office. Unacceptable.
No, that's
Then
unacceptable.
we find a placement for them, okay? And by the way, that placement, we take them to that placement with a trash bag. The little things that we actually took from their home, and most kids only arrive with the shirt on their back. They're given torn and tattered clothes that people have donated. And by the way, from somebody who has a nonprofit, we get donations all the time. And I am absolutely, as a human, so sad by my other humans who donate things that they would not even allow their own children to wear. Kids in foster care do not deserve dirty, smelly, old clothes. They don't deserve old luggage, all of those things. And so instead, they were put in a house of strangers. And I'm not going to sit here and say that every foster parent is bad because that's not the case. But the fact is we have more foster parents that should not be fostering than we have. And let me tell you why we turn our other eye. We turn the cheek because we don't have enough placements. And so we feel like that is better than nothing. But I'm telling you, it's not. It's not. So, yeah, that's the first 24 hours, 48 hours of a kid who enters the United States foster care system. And by the way, no different than in the UK. They do it the exact same way. Next year, we open up in Canada, a mirror image of the United States when it comes to foster care. So we can do better and we must do better.
That's really important information. Thank you for sharing that because I sort of knew the reality behind the scenes, and I'm not sure about my audience, but I'm hoping that this is giving them more of a picture into, as you say, the first 24 hours when they're taken and they're put into the system. How scary that must be, and
And
how
by the way,
demoralizing that must be.
just think about the fact that not only are they put in a system, taken away from their family of origin, most of the time siblings are split up. Most of my brothers and sisters I never saw again in my life. Okay. So that's very typical in our foster care system. So not only are they going through all of that, but then there's no type of structure or stability for them because we're moving them from placement to placement. So I'm gonna give you an example. Our daughter and son, they arrived when they were 2 and 4. They had been in foster care for 3 months. And in 3 months, we were their third placement. I remember saying to the social worker, why do they keep moving these little ones around so much? And the social worker literally said this to me. The placement before the 2-year-old, he broke a vase. He was pulling up on a end table. Mind you, 2-year-old, they said he would never talk or never walk. So and the vase broke and she called the social worker and says, I gotta get these kids out of my house. Get them, come and get them. And they can do that.
So there's so many layers to making a change in the system, right? There's so many layers to, the profile of the family that takes them in, to the way that they're treated when they're brought into the system, to how they're released as well. And you work on that piece, right? When they're released and the belongings that they take with them when they show up to their new home. That's your bread and butter. That's your space. I really want to talk about that because there's a huge component around dignity there. And
Really, it is. And, I can say that, I remember when and I only have one girl. I have 4 boys, 1 girl. And by the way, I have, and I say this to my daughter, she's now 21. I only had room in my heart for 1 girl because I have raised her as a princess because she will be a queen one day. And I remember that very first night, I was so I was a dad. I always wanted to be a dad. Most people, they grow up and they're thinking, oh, I want to be a teacher, a doctor. I have a son who he's NFL. And I just wanted to be a dad. That was it because I never had one. And so when I saw this little girl and she was so sad, like literally so sad. And when Reese pulled out the pajamas that had been given to us, they were the one-piece pajamas with the feet in the bottom. The feet, I'm not kidding you, Dorothy. They were so worn you could see through them. And I remember Reese saying, "Not happening." And so Reese had bought some stuff because we knew that we were getting a little girl at 4 and a little boy at 2. They'd given us about an hour and a half notice. And Reese had ran up to Target and bought a bunch of stuff. And we had taken the kids shopping as well. And Reese had laid 3 nightgowns on the bed. And Amaya had gone into her new room and she had picked up the little nightgown and she tore the tag off and she turned around and she smiled at me for the very first time. And I said, Amaya, why are you smiling? And she said, Mr. Rob, I've never owned a new pair of pajamas. Dorothy, that never left my heart, knowing that this young little girl, the only thing she wanted was a new pair of pajamas. So for us at Comfort Cases, I knew that that had to be one of the very first things we put in that case, a brand new pair of pajamas with a tag on. And so then I think about other things like toothbrush and toothpaste. And we all think, oh, but come on, those foster families, they give kids toothbrush and toothpaste. No, no. And by the way, my beautiful teeth and my teeth are beautiful. They cost me so much money because nobody bothered to give me any type of dental hygiene. I have a child who arrived at my home with four cavities. And by the way, he was two.
Wow.
So those are the things that we need to realize, the basics. And by the way, if you pick that low hanging fruit from a tree, the tree grows taller. And so for me, picking this low hanging fruit, stepping these kids off the curb in the right way, giving them all the things they need on their very first night, that blankie, that stuffy, that lotion, shampoo, conditioner. And yes, Dorothy, we give every child a brand new bar of soap. Because why? These kids walk into a house of strangers. We expect them to assimilate like that. That's not acceptable. We walk into hotels, we get brand new bars of soap. And by the way, I know for a fact as a public speaker, I travel the country speaking and I stay in a lot of hotels. And if I ever walked into a hotel and there was a used bar of soap, I'd call the front desk. I'd say, hey, by the way, get me into another room. Get this room clean. Dignity. Kids do it in foster care every day.
Yeah. You speak so passionately about your work with foster care children and being a parent as well, right? And you're obviously speaking from a place of lived experience, and I want to get into that now. So, can we talk a little bit about your personal story now? I'd love for our audience to hear about that because it's the backdrop too, the impetus for, everything that you do today. So,
See, as a young boy, I had already started hearing about foster care in the 70s because my brothers and sisters had already started falling to the wayside. Teenage pregnancy, drug addiction, incarceration. As a mother who had been married 6 times and had 10 kids, we lived in and out of every shelter in Maryland, Virginia, DC. Life was really rough, and my dad was the worst. He was a monster. At 59, I still have scars from the cigarettes my father would put out on me as a little boy. But again, that was my dad, and I loved him, and I loved my mother. But at the age of 12, it was time for me to go elsewhere. And so when I was given that trash bag and I entered the system, I decided to be different. I didn't want to be that kid that had the F word in front of him. So I called them mom and dad. I acted like I was their kid. But by the way, they never took me on vacation. They never once put a picture of me on the mantle, but they had to love me. I lived in their house for years. And then in 1984, I turned 18 years old. And the rude awakening of foster care hit me in the face because I became homeless. 22,000 children in the United States are going to age out in about 2026. They're averaging. And we know that 70% of those kids, Dorothy, will become homeless within 24 hours, just like me. That first night was so scary. And by the way, I know for a fact your listeners are saying, I wonder why you didn't tell somebody. I will explain. When kids like me in foster care tell people about that fact that we've been now exited out of the system, they stick us in detention centers, psychiatric hospitals. They actually think we're the problem in the community. But I remind people all the time when your gangs grow, it's because kids wanted to feel wanted. Okay. And those kids are majority kids in foster care. So, I say it quite often we have to love these kids. But for me, I wanted an education. I hid my trash bag. I walked into school every day. Kids spit on me. They threw me in lockers, but I made it to that graduation day. But when I graduated, the shocking thing happened to me. I walked across the stage and I didn't hear anyone clap. And I knew there were probably a couple of people out there, but as a young boy who had worked so hard to get to that stage, long hair, dirty, realizing that nobody applauded for me, I left the auditorium. I never went back to my seat. And I remember going to the back parking lot and I sat down and I cried. I cried for my mom and dad. I wanted to feel that cigarette so bad at that moment because at least if my dad was burning me, at least he was there. And then I cried for my foster parents. I was blown away that they gave up on me because of a check. And then I cried for my community who felt that this young boy who had tried and worked so hard that not one person clapped for him. But then I also realized that kids in foster care, we give them 3 choices and that is it. Choice number 1, we give up. Foster care has one of the highest suicide rates in young people right now than we have ever seen before. Choice number 2, we give in. We do exactly what you expect of us. We commit the petty crimes, we fill your penitentiaries, or we do choice number 3, which is what I chose to do, and that's give it all I got. And that's what I did. I joined the United States Navy. I became a very successful businessman and I never looked back. I realized that the whole thing that was taught to me was me, me, me. I bought a big house. I bought a fancy car. I filled my bank account. And then 17 and a half years ago, when our kids started to arrive, I knew that everything I had done, that the thought of me thinking of me, I had forgotten an entire population of kids. And so at that moment, it was when I decided that, you know what? I got to be the one person who stands up and says, listen, we all have the ability to push the mountain, but can you imagine how far we'll push it if we stand together? And so for me, I wanted to let our kids know that our legacy is about what we give and not what we take. And I wanted people to understand that empathy, it's not in our DNA, it's taught. And so with that, we grabbed a backpack. We put all those essential items in that I talked about, the stuffy, the blankie, the book, the toiletries, and we started handing them out. I thought that it would teach our kids that they could make a difference in society. I did not realize that it was going to teach a whole group of people that we all are collective as one. You know, I read it a long, long time ago and it's never left my mind. Nelson Mandela said it. He said, each and every one of us in society are judged by the way we treat our children. Well, kids in foster care, Dorothy, they don't belong to you. They don't belong to your listeners. They don't belong to me. They belong to us, to us. So 320,000 backpacks later, we have delivered them to all 50 states, DC, and Puerto Rico. And I want to remind everyone, Comfort Cases that was born 14 years ago is 96% volunteer ran. It's unheard of. And the thing is that 250,000 is normally the cap for about 80 of nonprofits in the United States. People don't talk about that. Comfort Cases, we're a $5 million organization that was built in my conference room, and we do not have large corporate sponsors writing us checks, but I have the largest corporation in the world supporting us, our human race, our human race. Because I remind people, your community, it is not your zip code. Your community is our human race. So that's the birth of Comfort Cases.
I love that explanation. And everything that you've said is so aligned with the spirit of my podcast and the Giving Circle. This is really about collective action, people coming together, because together we are greater than just one individual person doing something alone. And we've talked about community and the importance of community and showing up for one another. You mentioned that in the beginning of the show. And, the fact that you have so many volunteers is really a testament to them believing in you and the mission of your organization and, the impact that you are creating. So let me ask you, where do you get this resilience and drive from? Because it's not easy work,
My
right?
God.
And the fact that you had this very, challenging past, which thank you for sharing. It's never easy to share that, but you were able to still graduate. You were able to still pick yourself up and start a business and be successful, whatever the definition of success for you has meant. And it's evolved and changed over time. But where did you get that resilience from? What do you want to tell people about what that means in life?
Wow. I say it's where I got my grit, my grit. And I am going to say this, and I apologize for anybody that I offend because I've had emails. My Heavenly Father. See, I have a really, really deep faith. And I remind my kids all the time that Jesus was an amazing man, just like Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, and Mother Teresa. He loved his community more than we could ever imagine. And by the way, he loved me. And, I'm not going to sit here and throw anything at you, Dorothy. I don't believe in no gates and all that. I just know that there's a higher power that wants the best out of me. And I have to give my best to be the best of that. So that's where I get it from.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I think regardless of what religion, the listeners are, I think we all have, faith in a higher being or an energy that moves us to be the best that we can possibly be. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
And I want to talk a little bit more about comfort cases. You have talked about what goes into the kit, what goes into the book bags, and that how you hand them out, and a little bit of the inspiration. But go a little bit deeper.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about, a child and how they feel when they actually receive this.
You know, as I as I said, we put all of those items in there and we've changed over the years in 14 years and 320,000 backpacks. We now add deodorant for kids over the age of 10 because I'm a dad of 4 boys. We also have added feminine products for our girls over the age of 10 as a father of a daughter. I always remind men it's up to us to be allies to our ladies who are menstruating and to also understand that we would not be here without a menstrual cycle. And then we do other things by putting bookmarks that kids make from all over the country. But Dorothy, I have to tell you, the thing that stands out the most for me is when I go and I talk to kids who have received our cases. And these young people say to me quite often, Mr. Rob, why? I said, why what? They said, why does somebody give me all this new stuff? I say to the young people, as I say to people all over this world, you do not have to know someone to love someone. You truly don't. And these kids deserve our love. And I know with love, it can get you through to the next day. And that's why I think it's so important as individuals that we realize that loving someone is the greatest gift that we can give somebody, especially when that love, Dorothy, is unconditional. Unconditional. And real quick, I want to tell you about how important that is for me. See, the thing is you talked about my lived experience and this organization and so much that we've done, but I have to tell you, there's other people that have done stuff. I have a young man that's up on this wall here. He's my son, Alex. I was very lucky that when our 4 children arrived, they were little 6 months and two, 2 and 4. We watched them grow. And in 2019, I walked into a high school and I told my story, Dorothy, the story I shared with all of your listeners. And at that moment, a young boy walked up to me and he asked me if I would sign my memoir. I had been on a book tour. And I asked him what his name was. And he told me it was Alex. And I asked him to tell me something about himself. And he didn't have anything to tell. And I said, Alex, we all have a story. And he said, no, my story's like yours. I've been in foster care since I was 5. He'd been in 11 homes, 6 schools. He was getting ready to age out and he was going to be homeless. And I remember when he told me that, it hit me so hard. And I said, Alex, it doesn't have to go that way. He said, no, Mr. Scheer, I've fallen through the cracks of child welfare. I looked over at the principal. She had a tear going down her eye. She said, Mr. Scheer, Alex has a 3.6 and we don't know what to do. I remember handing Alex my business card and asking him to call me. And when I went home that night, I told our kids and Reese about meeting this young boy. And, I have to tell you something, Dorothy. At that moment as a dad, I realized the kind of humans I was raising because one of my kids said, Dad, if he calls, invite him to our house to have dinner. Let's meet him. And so he actually called me the next day and that Saturday, I picked him up from his foster parents' house, brought him over. He was playing in the backyard with the kids, and Reese decided to go. We were going to go out to dinner that night. And we went down to a local Mexican restaurant. We eat it all the time. And my kids were sitting there with Alex, and one of my sons said, Alex, you can order anything off the menu, and my dads don't care. And he was like, really? He's like, yeah, I'm getting the shrimp fajitas. And so my daughter looked at Alex and said, Alex, haven't you been to Guapos? And Alex was like, I don't remember the last time somebody took me to a restaurant. And at that moment, I realized I did my job. I saw the empathy flow out of my kids' eyes. We ate, went to Dave and Buster's, dropped Alex off at his foster parents' house. I get in the car and it's quiet. And all of a sudden, Makai goes, Daddy, we have to do something for Alex. And I was like, I know, buddy. I don't know what to do. And my kids were like, let's bring him home. And I was like, what? And I looked at my husband. He was like, what's one more? My husband and I were the very first couple in the state of Maryland to petition the courts to have a child from foster care come and live with us without a stipend. The judge looked at me and said, Mr. Scheer, why would you do this? I said to the judge, as I say to each and every one of you, every child deserves a foundation. Every child deserves to know there's someone there rooting them on. But what every child deserves to feel, Dorothy, is what does it feel like to be loved unconditionally? I looked at my son and he was crying. He said, Pops, you've changed my life. I said, no, buddy, you've changed our lives. I said, I only have one regret. The judge said, Mr. Scheer, what is your regret? I said, I didn't walk him to kindergarten, but now I get to walk with him for the rest of his life. A year after that, we were in the height of COVID. My son looked at Reese and I and said, Pops, Dada, would you adopt me? I was like, why? I was like, you're not going anywhere. He was like, no, I want the same last name as my sister and brothers and as you and Dada. I called my adoption attorney and we adopted Alex. Our kids are now 25, 21, 19, 19, and 7.
Y- you were meant to be a dad for sure, 100%, as you dreamed about when you were younger. But you talk a lot about legacy too, and I think legacy is a lot of the values that we instill in our children. And that's absolutely coming full circle for you. And I can see the joy that it's bringing you. So that's
And by the way, it's a
amazing as
lot
a
of hard
parent.
work.
No, I know. I'm a
I
parent
mean,
too.
being a parent,
I don't have,
woo,
you said you have four, right? I only
5.
have one.
We have
Five,
5.
five.
So
I only
we
have
had
one. It's a lot. It's hard work, but I
it's a lot
think,
of work.
you know, I think with someone like you, someone with a TEDx talk, someone with a nonprofit, someone who is a motivational speaker, someone who's out there advocating for youth around the country and in the UK, and now you're expanding into Canada too. They have absolutely something to look at and feel so proud of. So I think that's amazing. And you know, one of the things that I keep thinking about when you talk about the backpacks that you put together and all of the products that you put in, and you've really thought through what should go in there, right? The word impact is a very abstract word, I think, and it's hard to kind of wrap our heads around when we use it so loosely, right? But I think in this case, like, it's about making a difference in the moment, when a child is coming out of the system. Impact and making a difference can come in so many different shapes and sizes and forms. And that immediate impact that it is having on these kids is pretty remarkable. So thank you for that. And thank you for sharing your story. This is really incredible work. Tell me a little bit about where Comfort Cases is headed now. You did
Where
mention
are we
Canada.
headed? Oh my god, I
Yeah.
love that. Again, 96% volunteer ran. Our national headquarters is in Gaithersburg, Maryland. We have been here for, like I said, for 14 years. We do have operations in London. We're getting ready to open next year and operations in Canada. And we are hoping by the end of 2027, we'll also have a national center on the West Coast like we do have on the East Coast. But about 7 years ago, Reese and and by the way, I'm a banker by trade. I was a banker for 28 years. I had my own businesses and everything. It wasn't until 2018 when Derek Jeter published my memoir, Forever Family, that I actually realized that, you know what? I no longer wanted a job. I wanted a purpose. And so, but I also learned through this, Dorothy, is that when you go into your community and you educate them of a problem, communities are really, really amazing and they're very smart. So if you go in and you teach them of a problem and show them how to correct that issue, they'll come together and do it. We've proven that. But what I realized is the trash bag wasn't being eliminated. It was the Comfort Cases, amazing comfort on that first night for that transition. But I kept seeing trash bags. And so I went door knocking and I ended up getting a meeting with Briggs and Riley. Briggs and Riley is one of the leading luxury luggage brands in the world. And I told Richard my story and exactly what I needed. And it took several months, but he finally came back and he got me this. And this we call a Comfort XL. This is a 32-inch duffel bag. It retails for $119. When you unfold it, this is what that young person gets,
Wow.
where they can put all of their stuff. And by the way, I get them for $10 a piece. And so we
Great.
have given out over 190,000 of these. We are one of the only organizations that does what we do and we do not charge. So, social workers, I hope you are listening because you are all doing good every day. Go to comfortcases.org, go up to the top and say order a case. And for all of you that have direct contact with our youth in foster care, get some cases, get some Comfort XL, and make sure that you make tomorrow brighter for our youth than it is today. And we know that firsthand, thanks to the state of Maryland, Texas, New York, getting ready to say North Carolina, Virginia. They've all passed bills that states no child in the foster care system in our state and those states are allowed to carry trash bags. So they've set money aside for a budget that actually will get kids what they truly deserve. And people ask me all the time, why isn't Comfort Case written in that bill? Because guess what? It's not about Comfort Cases. It's about building the foundation of our future for young people. And no matter how they do that, we all should be involved in that, just not Comfort Cases.
It's incredible. That's a huge development and a huge step in the right direction. So
Who would
something
have
to really
thought?
kind of, yeah, something to really kind of watch out for. So my last question for you then is for the listeners who are really moved by the work that you're leading to transform the system and bring comfort and dignity to youth in the foster care system, how will donations to the Giving Circle support your organization?
We're 96% volunteer ran. People look at my 990s and they're like, how in the world does he do this? 97% of every dollar that comes into our nonprofit goes to our mission. Okay. I run our organization like I ran my businesses, lean, because when someone gives me a dollar, they expect us to use that dollar in the right way. So I say to people all the time, if you choose to donate to Comfort Cases, we're going to make sure we take care of your backyard before you take care of your front yard. So I have people that donate all the time and they'll say, hey, I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, and I just donated $1,000. And guess what we're going to do? We're going to get $1,000 worth of Comfort Cases, and we're going to call that agency in Louisville, Kentucky, and say, you know what? You have an amazing human that lives in your community, and I have cases on their way from this amazing human for the donation. Again, we take care of our backyard before we take care of our front.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Do Good on Purpose podcast, Rob. It has been such an honor to have you here with me. Best of luck to you as you expand into Canada and continue to work to change the lives of youth in the foster care system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Have a great day.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode on the Do Good on Purpose podcast. And if today's conversation inspired you, please consider supporting the work through the Do Good on Purpose Giving Circle, which is linked in the show notes. And if you really enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. Share it with someone who believes in building a better world, because change rarely happens by accident. It happens when people decide to do good on purpose.